The next topic will be how will this relationship of US, Iran, Middle East affects the United States, Philippines, and the rest of the world. So the contents of this report will be: first, how will the US-Iran relationship affects the United States? Second, how will the US-Iran relationship affects the rest of the world? Third, how will the US Middle East affects the United States? Third, how will the US and Middle East relationship affects the rest of the world? And fifth, how does US Iran Middle East affects the Philippines? The first part will be how will US Iran relationship affects the United States? First, it affects US foreign policy. The Trump administration has backed out from the Iran nuclear deal agreement. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, known commonly as the Iran nuclear deal, is an agreement on the Iranian nuclear program reached in Vienna on July 14, 2015, which includes the permanent members of the United Nations Security Councils, namely the United States, United Kingdom, Russia, France, and China, plus Germany and the European Union. Second, it affects U.S. domestic policy. The Trump administration has deployed additional military assets to the region to try to deter future Iranian actions. Moreover, the United States military will send about 3,500 additional soldiers to the Middle East following the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. The second part is how does US-Iran relationship affects the whole world. The conflict between Iran and the United States will lead to fluctuations in currency and stock markets and an immediate rise in the price of oil and gold. How? Because oil reserves in Iran, according to its government, rank fourth largest in the world. And Iran is a major oil exporter with significant regional geopolitical influence. The third part will be how does US and Middle East relationship affects the United States. 19% of US imported oil comes from the Middle East. According to the American Petroleum Institute, the oil and natural gas industry supports 9 million US jobs and makes up 7% of the nation's gross domestic product. American producers are exporting more crude oil than the entire country of Iran produces. US will never be fully energy independent, and the Middle East will likely remain a larger part of the global oil market well into the future. The fourth part will be how does the US and the Middle East relationship affects the rest of the world. Since the 1930s, the Middle East has emerged as the world's most important source of energy and the key to the stability of the global economy. This region produces today's 37% of the world's oil and 18% of its gas. When it comes to reserves, the Persian Gulf is king. Middle East supplies affect the price of Middle Eastern oil, but also affects the price of global oil. The majority of Saudi Arabia's oil in 2018 went to countries in Asia, particularly Japan, China, South Korea, and India. The United States imported $21.9 billion worth of oil from Saudi Arabia in 2018. Part 5. How does US-Iran Middle East affects the Philippines? First, how does US-Iran affects the Philippines? US-Iran conflict can gravely affect Filipinos. There are about 1,181 Filipinos in Iran according to the DFA Office of the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers data as of June 2019. And labor migration will also happen if the unrest in Iran prompted the Philippine government to send 2 battalions of soldiers along with air and naval assets to assist in the repatriation of Filipino workers in Iraq and Iran. Finally, how does US Middle East relationship affects the Philippines? Right now, the US and Middle East relationship is stable, specifically with Saudi Arabia. However, if US-Iran conflict will turn into war, it would affect millions of OFWs in the Middle East. More than half of Filipinos working abroad were in Arab Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia hosted nearly 25% of all overseas workers from the Philippines. Foreign remittances payments are the second largest source of foreign capital and account for more than 10% of the Philippines' gross domestic product. Remittances have been the country's biggest source of foreign exchange income, insulating the domestic economy from external shocks by ensuring a steady supply of dollars in the system. That is why the US, Iran, and Middle East relationship is important to the Philippines. Thank you and have a great day.